All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is John Harkins. I'm the Events Associate for the French American Chamber of Commerce, New York chapter. The French American Chamber of Commerce, New York chapter is happy to welcome you to today's session on breaking into new markets to fight economic slowdown. Just a quick word about our organization for any new participants. The French American Chamber of Commerce mission is to provide the networks and opportunities, experiences, and understanding that empower successful business operations between and for members. Through international training programs for young professionals, trade services, and networking opportunities, we foster the development of individuals and companies. The FACC-New York chapter is part of a larger national network of 18 regional chapters and counts a mosaic of 1,000 members representing sectors such as tech, luxury, food, finance, and other professional services. These members have complimentary access to webinars featuring top industry experts and leaders, as well as personalized member-to-member introductions, and of course, access to the FACC member directory. Before we begin fully, just a few housekeeping items to take care of. This webinar will last for about an hour with 30 minutes of presentation, with another 30 minutes of room for questions and answers. As attendees, you can type questions while presentation is underway. Please make full use of this, as we'll use those questions both during and after the presentation. I would also like to mention that you'll receive a copy of the slides as well as a link to download the recording, so don't worry about missing anything. In addition, at the end of the webinar, members will receive a link to view other members' attendees and connect from there. Now to the main events. Never waste a crisis. Too many companies are putting their expansion plans on hold right now and praying for better times to come, when in reality, now is actually the best time to rethink your growth strategy, gear up, and prepare your response to the changing environment. In this webinar, we will explore how various companies across industries have successfully leveraged geography, verticals, client size, and distribution to capture untapped business opportunities and thrive. Today, we will be speaking with Julian Marzouk. Julian is the managing partner of Kinesis Partners, a boutique consulting firm with offices in New York and Paris, which helps companies from the CPG and tech industries break into new markets to create value and grow. He also serves as a partner at Lazar Consulting. He previously was the head of strategy at Altios in New York City and a strategy consultant at Advention in Paris. Now, without further ado, I'll hand things over to Julian and we will get started. Julian?
Thank you very much, John. Hello, everyone. Thank you for making space in your day, such a lovely day to attend a webinar. To give you a little bit of context about this webinar as an introduction, a few weeks ago, it's going to be 6 to 7 weeks now, when I saw my clients and most entrepreneurs, companies around me cancel and postpone their expansion plans, at first I thought it made sense. In the first couple of weeks, we needed to take a step back, understand what was going on. But then when we saw a little bit that the new normal is not going to be for a while, I thought that's a precious time not to waste. That's opportunity. And that's when I realized that I wanted to talk about it. And as anyone who's working in this field to help companies grow, it's difficult to speak practically about it. And it was important for me to not give a lecture about theories, but to speak about practical examples. Growth, and especially the market entry, is such a case-by-case type of topic. And talking about it was important to do it across industries, across sizes, and still be concrete. So the answer I found, and that I will talk about in this webinar, is focused on 3 goals. There are 3 goals for this webinar. The first one is to remove roadblocks. To remove roadblocks to resume or initiate expansion projects, because now is the time, I believe, and I will explain you so. Switch mindsets to really be convinced that anyone in position for it should have an expansion project right now. So the first goal is a call for action. The second one is that we will go over use cases of companies that I've worked with for the most part to spark ideas, how others did it. That's number 2, spark ideas. Number 3 is to zero in on specific tools and frames that I believe are to be key, and you probably know some of them, if not all of them. What's essential here is the fact that they're essential to any expansion project. This approach, to put it simply, is a combination of strategy consulting methodologies and lead generation techniques to test traction on a market. Now, here is the 5 simple steps framework that we will zero in with use cases in this webinar. The first one is knowing the market, studying the market, understanding the market, and we'll see how. The second one is organizing internally, operationally, making space for this new expansion project, creating a task force. Number 3 is talking to the end users, talking to the people you're going to target. Number 4, initiating the approach, sending outreach. And number 5 is monitoring the approach, which means analyzing the data collected. In this webinar, we're going to investigate each phase through the lens of a different use case and a different type of market entry. Now, let's begin directly with the first market entry type, new territories. Now, a new area that's relevant for you right now. What makes sense for you? If you don't have a lot of resources, what's an easy one? I ask those questions because it's usually the first roadblock. What's a relevant territory for me, considering the type of business that I have and the type of resources that I have? The first use case is going to be about an East Coast packaging company that expanded to the West Coast. They wanted to expand, but they were afraid that their market on the West Coast was going to be too small and too crowded. That's actually a very common roadblock also. It's just perfect opportunity to explore the first step, knowing the market. So, too small, we need to size the market. There are many ways to do so. Too crowded, we're going to study the competitive landscape, competition. And number 3, talking to the end users, the clients. So the market too small, sizing the market. There are many ways to do so. Here on the other, on this slide, there is an example of market sizing. Market sizing can be done by starting with what we call the broad market. There is usually a broader section of the market that you're operating in that is going to be researched, studied, and where you're going to be able to access easily figures and information. Here, it's a packaging company, rigid cardboard. So the broad market is cardboard packaging in the US. First figure. Then we apply West Coast, California. What's the share of California in this broader market? 10%, perfect. Then, what's the share of rigid cardboard? This is the reference market. We're going more specific from this broad market. We managed to get another figure from another intelligence study. And last but not least, what's the estimated share of the high-end rigid cardboard segment, which is the sweet spot and the core business of this company. This you're going to find in interviews. In interviews and compiling figures from different players to have an estimate. Now, the figure that we found here, 100 million, is for sure not extremely small, but it is not it's not necessarily reassuring as is. You obviously need to see what's the competition like. After studying the competition, we realized that the market was very fragmented with a lot of brokers. So that was one good thing. There was room for a consistent player to take market shares. But how to do so if you're not sure that what market share you're going to be able to take? My point here is that we realized that we needed to investigate another vertical to increase the addressable market. And that's where we started to brainstorm about other verticals that could be addressed in California. And that's where we started to think about the tech industry, obviously in California. Huge opportunity. Just by thinking, we are addressing those fancy packaging for cosmetics, for fashion, for accessories. Why not doing the packaging for products such as iPhones and iPads? We could see a lot of similarities in the boxes. And that's when we started to talk to the end users. It's actually not that difficult to talk to end users in another market. People actually want to talk about what they do if you approach them in the right manner. Just asking for 5 minutes of their time. Those are informational interviews. You can say that you will also share some data with them, incentivize them for giving them time and sharing information with you. Obviously, these interviews need to be 100% non-selling interviews. And it's important to have a written topic guide, because you'll all very often have to select a few questions considering the time that you will have. And generally, to write a topic guide, you have 3 main categories. The first one is related to market topics, market questions, qualitative trends, quantitative trends, market size questions, key selling products, brands, evolutions, etc. The second topic is going to be related to competition. Which trends, which are the big players growing, what's their positioning. And then you have clients, obviously, key success factors in the market, their feedback on the big players. Ideally, you would need at least 15 qualified interviews. And it happens that it actually worked. It happens that this company actually ended up working with Intel, who became their first client in the tech industries after initiating this approach. It just happened that their price point was good, that their product was a match, and it's been now 2 years that this company has a West Coast office with a small team generating substantial revenues. The manager of the US activities traveled there on a regular basis. Plus, they found out that there are a lot of synergies with their current accounts that now value their presence over there. Now, if you don't have a lot of resources, it can literally be 30 miles away. Later on in a section related to different size of clients, we'll be talking about a company that found growth in the tri-state area, actually, after focusing on NYC for a number of years. So peripheral areas of big metropolitan cities are also a good way to go if you don't know where to start.
And Julian, just a quick question on the territories. How involved was the leadership team within this use case?
Well, actually, it's really important that the leadership is committed. And here, the responsible for the US activities played a huge role, because he was the one willing to make it happen. He was committed to find solutions to open an office on the West Coast. So he had to really get the buy-in from the leadership at the headquarters in Europe. And he had to really leverage all the market study that we did to convince them of the opportunity and of the potential that there was over there. It's really a process where early on you need to communicate with everybody that's going to have to make a decision in this. And we'll see also a little later how it's important to have a champion for the expansion project, the project lead that will basically navigate politics and fight for the project to happen. So the next section is new verticals. So how to choose a relevant vertical to expand to. That's a very common roadblock also to expansion. People don't know which vertical to choose, how to choose it, and there's a lot of doubts around it. I'm going to talk about two examples here of companies that found a way, being clueless originally, and they found and their solutions were very different. But in both cases, I think we can say that they found simple solutions to complex problems, and that's going to be a recurring thing in this webinar, and I think in this field generally speaking. And for those who are interested, it's actually developed in a book by Eli Goldratt that's called The Theory of Constraints, that details exactly this. The first example is a SaaS company providing workflow solutions for communication teams, large companies. This is a French-based company that had committed to expand to the US, a key market for their growth strategy. Their solution as is was too exhaustive, too difficult to start with for accounts. It implied a lot of changes internally in those teams. So the question became how to start a relationship with all these prospect clients with a lighter solution, with a lighter topic. And quickly came the idea to build a new service offering, something to get in, to get the first clients, and then roll out the rest of their solution once the trust was established. So we continued the brainstorming, starting with who are we targeting? Communication teams. Okay, so apart from facilitating their collaboration, what else can we offer them? What are their pain points? Industry trends. Fake news. Okay, fake news. So how can they trust news? Those are corporate communication team. This is an opportunity. Now, how to address it? We're a tech company. What are tech trends right now that we can use for this? Blockchain. What about blockchain? Bingo. Let's make the whole process trackable, accountable, and transparent. Now, which communication teams needed the most? How to prioritize which teams to address to start with? Financial services are obviously in need for, and particular need for this type of solutions for financial information and communication. So they came up with this offering with a solution where companies can certify their corporate information on the blockchain and also invite their partners to check their authenticity. So there you have, in this example, new geography, new vertical, and innovation. Innovation was the tool eventually to choose and find a new vertical to expand to. And just for the example, since then, this company has secured among very big names, banks, asset management groups. They hired a business development team dedicated on this new service line, and it's been 2 years now. Now, another way to address finding a new vertical is for a marketing automation company. So it happened in a very different way. They also, and this you can see a pattern, they also were committed to finding a solution. And I think this is key here. As long as you're committed to having a growth project happens, the examples of those companies show that if you have a frame, you find solutions. Here, they didn't know how to look for a new vertical. They were addressing tech companies originally. They didn't know where to start. So they just started with operations. They created a task force internally. They made resources available for the project and created a space for it. Sort of a startup within the startup. Practically, what does it mean? Well, they estimated time and resources that they wanted to dedicate it to it. They found an internal lead to allocate resource that would lead the project. They also discussed leadership buy-in with key figures and revenue potential. And the new vertical was actually found by one of the sales rep, part of the dedicated team. He just loved sports and managed to get everybody excited in the team to find a way to work with big sports clubs in the US. And we actually found out that sales and ticketing departments at big sports clubs were poorly automated. So there was really an opening to pitch them for marketing automation. So what we did is we created a new marketing funnel for this new prospect category. New content, use cases, articles describing specifically how to automate email sequences and templates for ticketing departments, and how to streamline the relationship with their customers. We got active in social media groups talking about it, created networks around sports, and obviously it requested collaboration from other departments. It was really a teamwork, but eventually it became one of their top 5 verticals. They are significantly big company today, and sports clubs are actually a significant vertical for them. And on the way, they just learned how to prepare and gear up both internally and in terms of approach to develop into a new vertical. So you have very different ways to approach this innovation, having it emerge internally, and in both cases, dedication.
Okay, we have a question, Julian, on timing. Would you be able to give a timeline on modifying the online presence in this scenario?
Right. It depends, obviously. What we can say is for the first use case, we are talking about 6 months to a year. And it's actually kind of the same for the second option. That's why it's extremely precious time right now, where you can have all this opportunity to inquire internally, to prepare for this type of project, and get ready for a change in the economy, of course. But obviously it depends. You know, those two are 6 months to a year to get ready, let's say.
Okay.
Okay, so different client size. That's another way to find a new market. And that is usually something that happens without looking for it organically, but it can actually be used as a tool. To talk about it, I selected a use case of an ad tech company that actually became successful addressing smaller size media companies. Now, how did it go? So after approaching big NYC media groups for some time, they were actually not getting the results they were hoping for. They wanted to know what it was that was not working. And they started to approach companies away from NYC, but literally just in the tri-state area. So a range of 30 to 100 miles from where they're usually targeting companies, smaller companies in size. It just happened that those companies were less solicited. there was less competition, and they started to respond positively about it. It was not obvious, and it didn't happen overnight, but it was actually possible thanks to the way they approach those companies and how they analyze the data of this approach. What does it mean? For those who are not using or not familiar with email marketing or marketing automation techniques, it means that actually they created a variety of customized sequences and templates to automate their approach. They used the intelligence they had on pain points to calibrate their approach and focus on what was the most important. If we have to break down those first email, we can say that there is a first part that addresses a common problem in the space. Then there's a second part that references current customer in the vertical, getting quotes from customers, for example, and from current customers. And the third that will be links to other collaterals that will be use cases, case studies, or just one pager describing the approach. And it's only with this kind of systematic approach emailing that they were able to realize that there was traction before making sales, before even getting commitment, but just by analyzing the data, analyzing email opening rates, email reply rates. And they were able to compare it with their NYC approach, where they were seeing less traction. But obviously it took a little bit of time. So when you're able to get precise on analyzing the data from these approaches, and if you're willing to invest time to analyze and get the intelligence from it, then it pays off. And it can be very useful to have, like, for instance, a dedicated dashboard for it that will track on a daily basis. You can access anytime information such as open rates, reply rates, account engagement, number of opportunities, new pipeline generated, revenues closed, renewal rates, and eventually, to circle back on this example, these smaller sized media companies in the tri-state area became their biggest market for a while, but more importantly, they were able to replicate this approach with similar sized companies in other less busy markets.
Okay, and just a question for myself to help all those who are watching. What software would you recommend for the email campaigns that you mentioned?
Okay, so there are a lot of softwares that you can use, depending on how specific you want to be. Obviously, you have Outreach that is very granular, very powerful, that you can combine with Salesforce with your CRM. You have HubSpot that is also very popular. But then for a lot of companies, starting with MailChimp or ActiveCampaign is far enough and gets them both the tools to approach a big amount of companies with templates and sequences, and first tools to analyze the data. So it really depends on where you are, but for sure, you don't need to invest in a pricey solution if you don't want to. Mm-hmm. Even and it's the same for actually for project planning, for the previous section, to organize internally, you now have a lot of options of technology that are relevant. Asana, Monday.com, that kind of addressed project planning for the mass market, and with even like free versions of it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now I'm just going to try to wrap it up to leave some space for the Q&A, because I believe it's very important. The new distribution channels. Let's zero in on ways to overcome roadblocks regarding distribution channels. Now, the first example is a food supplement business. This business was focused on retail. They had a very good track record selling in retail outlets in Europe, but they realized how difficult it was going to be to have the same approach in the US, when given how crowded the retail channels were in this category here, the amount of products there were on shelves here. So we realized we needed to get creative. With them, we explored the partner alley, prescribers. Since the product was reliable, we were able to be quite convincing regarding the claim, and especially in the field of digestive health. So we studied which partners could be the most relevant as prescribers. Would it be doctors, certified nurses, dietitians? It turned out the answer was nutritionists, because the level of trust patients had in them, and because of the type of issues that were being discussed. So to really have an important commitment from prescribers, we realized that we needed to put them at the center of the strategy, to really create a relationship with them. So what we did was to create a dedicated space for nutritionists on our e-commerce website, which allowed them to book products from the e-commerce website in their dedicated space for their patients, with a partnership model that we set up. This way, the patients could directly log in to the dedicated account and get the right product without having to look for it, and obviously with a reliable recommendation. Prescribers were a great way to go about it for this example, and I believe that this is actually a model that obviously is becoming more and more popular, not only because it makes it possible to include online to the regular offline businesses or businesses that just had maybe e-commerce to really kind of go a step further on the online presence and online strategy. And it's actually a trend in so many businesses. And I'm going to use a quote from Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff. Last year said, every B2B and B2C company today is becoming a B2B2C company. Lastly, I want to finish with a retail company, even if retail is obviously struggling right now, to say the least. But retail will reopen, and there are successful strategy and also misconceptions. So the last case study I wanted to bring up quickly is related to a luxury tableware company that had a lot of challenges. Their revenues had stopped growing for several years. Their presence in department stores was getting smaller and smaller, profitability shrinking. Their online efforts were barely compensated by the gap from their offline activities. Basically, they didn't know what to do. There was one alley that they hadn't considered, which were independent networks, independent retailers. And that's the common misconception, is that it's going to be too small. The problem is we're not in Europe, we're in the US. And actually, independent stores, specialty stores, regional distribution networks can be huge business opportunities here. That was the first roadblock. The second roadblock was that they thought that it was going to be too difficult to address those networks, to reach out to them. Well, actually, it was not. There are solutions that have been developed historically And after studying the market, we discovered that there are actually sales veterans, agents, who are on the road 200 days per year and who already address these specialty stores, who have the connection of those networks, depending on the industries we're talking about, on a state-by-state basis or even on a regional basis. And those agents require certain retribution, obviously, but the amount of value that they bring to your business, basically opening a new distribution channel, is huge. So obviously it required reorganization internally. They had to rethink which products to put forward for their US activities to reduce the range of products they had, but it worked. And quite quickly after starting to approach these distribution channels, they've seen sales go up. And now I'm going to leave space for the questions from anyone here, and I will leave you the floor, John.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you, Julian. We have some questions regarding the last use case, but so we'll start there and then just continue to take it along. The first question we've got, how long, mentioning the last use case with the luxury and the retail, how long did the whole process take?
It was quite long because the part that was actually the longest was to decide which products were going to be put forward for this new channel. It sounds counterintuitive, but it was actually quite easy to recruit those agents and salespeople once we realized where they were. They were basically in the trade shows of those of the industry, tableware, tabletop trade shows, and they're actually, everybody knows them, and in industries it's regularly like that. When you start getting involved in the industry, you know who are the people to talk to for which topic. So this was actually quite easy, but the problem was that to make that specific distribution channel work, you needed to have logistics sorted very well, because tableware is kind of a difficult industry. You have different types of decoration, different types of qualities, so you have a lot of different, it's like matrixed products. So we found a way to kind of narrow down the offering and to make it work. But the thing is that what they did to address this new channel was actually helpful in all other distribution channels. And I think we can see a recurring pattern for most of the use cases here, is that whatever they did to address this new market, whether it's a new area, a new vertical, different sizes, new distribution channel, what they did to prepare for it actually became a strength that they used in other areas of their activities.
Okay. Just a quick note to the attendees. We have a bunch of questions coming in, but feel free to send them on. We'll do our best to get through them. Julian, going back to the client size, is different client size effective in terms of ROI? It's reasonable to infer that a large client will have a larger budget and a smaller client the inverse. This would require a number of small clients to equal the volume or revenue of one large client. Instead of a full pivot, are you suggesting diversification of your client portfolio?
Exactly. Exactly. That's the whole point. For them, in this use case, and then I'll circle back with the question, but they were not a large company. They were a small and medium-sized company targeting large companies, and they found much more success targeting smaller companies. But they're still going after the big accounts now. It's just not their sweet spot. But obviously, the idea is not to pivot necessarily. The idea is to add. and the preparation phase you go through to actually add another tool, another market to your possibilities is a huge strength, not only because you add this little revenue, but also because you are able to address more diversity, and you are able to structure what you find out for the rest of your business internally is extremely precious. But obviously you have companies who need to pivot. They are just not working well enough the way they are. But that was not the purpose of the case study I used.
Okay. Next question. Do you have any tips for fostering a culture of innovation internally, making employees feel at ease to propose solutions and engage and invested to see them through?
The million-dollar questions. I have some ideas that I can share. It's obviously a culture, meaning that it depends on leadership, how much they value it, they're open to it, how much they foster conversations around it with their teams. One thing that proved very useful was to have those ideas being shared anonymously and being shared via writing. There was no pressure actually from being face-to-face with other colleagues and risking to have an idea that will be not considered well. And having a system where you can share ideas in writing is actually beneficial. Now, again, circling back to what we were saying earlier, the fact that feeling that the company is committed to really making it happen, to really looking for new markets to expand, and to have people consider joining for a task force to lead the way, making space for it, even, you know, on top of what they're already doing. You know, it's like there are so many things that can be done, but obviously it starts with making space for it internally and willing to commit to it.
Okay. And shifting gears to give some consideration to French companies, looking at the expanding into new territories in the East Coast versus West Coast example, besides leadership buy-in, are there important cultural considerations for French companies? Can they adopt the same way of doing business, or do they need to adapt their approach to pitching and closing new accounts?
So in this example, that's why it made a lot of sense to open this office. They had already gone through the culture shock of adapting to the US market. They had already been present on the East Coast for a number of years, 5 to 10 years. So the difference between East Coast and West Coast culture is obviously not the same. It's not the same gap as between European and American cultures. So in those cases, it's definitely an easier decision to make and an easier buy-in to get from leadership. Now, obviously, if we're talking about European companies expanding to the US, it really needs to be a key project. It needs to be a priority for the company to make a lot of sense strategically, long-term, and it will take some time and investment and resources. But this webinar is full of companies who made it and successfully so. It's just, you know, you need to plan accordingly, some time and resources to do it.
Okay. And from a short-term perspective, if a business is struggling to stay afloat now, should they look to optimization of their existing verticals and integrate new verticals into their long-term recovery plan?
Ideally, yes. Ideally, I would, and that's kind of the angle that I have today, is, you know, give yourself more possibilities. Be prepared for a wider variety of scenarios when when things go back to some sort of normalcy. And so the idea is obviously what needs to be adjusted in your core business to tackle it, but start now, use the time to prepare and have the goal to expand to one new market at least, whether it's a new area, new vertical, etc. And I think this is a very low risk strategy. You do it according to your resources, but you just add capabilities to how to tackle the problems that will keep coming in the next few months, hopefully not years.
Okay. And speaking on the client size part of what you were talking about, how do you get to build the contact list?
Okay, so there are a lot of ways to build a contact list. Obviously, you have technology companies that are very successful doing so. You can subscribe. ZoomInfo is a famous one. I think now they have a yearly subscription model. It's a bit pricey, but you can have a trial for a length of time to get you started. Then you obviously have LinkedIn. It takes time because it has to be done case by case, but it is very efficient. And then you have content marketing solutions, which are very powerful. Now you need some time to spend on this topic to make it happen, but it certainly pays off. And this is to wherever you're used to communicating, whether on your own website, on partnering websites, media, or even if you have your own blog related to your business, to share content, quality content that is related to your business. And this content will be gated. Basically, will be available for anyone with the condition that they are entering their information, that they're entering their email addresses and data. This way, you directly build up prospects that are interested in your activities, in your core business, passively. And that's a good way to also do it. And then obviously you have all those partnering associations and clubs that are full of resources, directories, and you can sometimes buy them, but it's a little tricky to buy databases that have not been updated. It's always a difficult choice. I think the other allies offer you more reliability.
Okay, and just a final question, we'll leave off here. Regarding new territories, where do we find the industry trends and info?
So you have a lot of companies who are doing market studies, providing with industry intelligence. I mentioned a few in the first slide. Those are very mass market, Ibis World, for instance. To have a bit more specific high-end companies, you have Euromonitor, Data Monitor, Data One, Xerfi, Nielsen, Monitor Group, and obviously you need to pay for those reports. You can access a lot of those reports for free, actually, in New York at the Graduate Center on 34th Street. You'll just need a library card. That's for your information. Otherwise, you can find a lot of information online. Obviously, there's just bits and pieces that will be used and taken from those reports in industry articles and in-depth analysis. But obviously, you can find a lot of information there also.
Okay, I think that'll do it for the Q&A. So we're coming to the end of our time here then. So I'd like to thank you all for your participation, for those who attended, and thank you, Julian, for an incredibly engaging presentation. To the attendees, if you're interested in joining the FACC network or need connections or assistance, if you're already a member, please feel free to reach out directly to us at membership@FACC-NYC.org. As I mentioned, this presentation's recordings and slides will be sent to all participants. And as a reminder, we have an exciting calendar coming up. So tomorrow we have Managing Rent Relief through COVID-19. On Thursday, we have the beginning of our lunchtime series, Tasting Through France. And on Friday, we have a webinar that's dedicated solely to an update on PPP and SBA information. So thank you again for coming today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Julian, thank you once more. We really appreciate having you here and really appreciate everything you had to say. Looking forward to having you again sometime in the near future. And to everyone that listened in, have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
It was my pleasure, John. Thank you. Thank you all for attending. And obviously, I'm available for any follow-up questions you might have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.